Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
I'm Paul Spector, and we're going to be talking about aging today. I called it the Enlightenment of Age because there's a revolution going on in terms of how we're understanding aging that I think is as great as any revolution that's occurred, certainly in the health sciences. And as you know, over the past century, there was an increase in lifespan of almost 30 years, which is pretty extraordinary. And it was largely due to sanitation, clean water, not so much medical advances. Antibiotics came in at the end of that, but it was really plumbing and having a cleaner environment. We're going through something now that I think is going to be even greater than that last century's increase of 30 years. And I don't mean by that that we're going to increase 30 years again, but I think that we're going to change the way we understand aging and have interventions that are going to change what it looks like to age. So possible. Uh-oh. Let me see if I can do it here. No. I'm going to have to go get Tammy. Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chew it out loud, baby.
What can you do it with?
I tried that.
So. Darn.
Yeah.
There.
Okay. So before we even get into definitions and things, I just want to also say that this is an overview. The there could be a lecture on every single slide that you're going to look at. But I want to give you a feel for what's going on in terms of the way we think about aging and how radically it's changing. So I think here's a definition of aging that anybody could embrace. It's not very controversial, right? Gradual process converts young, healthy, fertile adults into less healthy, infertile older ones with an increasing risk of dysfunction and death. I'm going to suggest that we need to look at aging as a disease process, and we need another word to talk about maturation or growing older, but that aging is really a disease that is characterized by these symptoms, right? Cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancer, dementia, osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes, sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass, Parkinson's, and others, all of the age-related diseases. And the problem is that we approach each one of those disease entities as a separate problem. And the point is that they have a common pathway that comes into it that is really the biology of aging. And so I'm going to talk to you a lot about that today. If you want to ask anybody what is the greatest risk factor for disease, it's aging. Aging is the greatest risk factor for aging. Here's a slide with cancer, and you can see how the cases per 100,000 increase over time with age. And so you go from 20, where it's basically negligible, and then you come into the 50s, 60s, 70s, and it's gone up thousands of times, right? Let's take one of the most well-known carcinogens, tobacco, cigarette smoking. More than 20 years of smoking, and you see it goes on and on. And the point is, more than 10 cigarettes a day for 50 years, you've increased it by 45 times. It's significant for sure, and it's one of the preventable causes of cancer, but it's nothing compared to aging, right? This is another graph. This is an exponential. The y-axis is exponential, and just again shows you how all of these things dramatically increase with age. So what's the goal? in this arena. The point is we want to increase health span, right? Let's say we do nothing in terms of changing lifespan. If we can push this curve where you're functional or functional and fit over, maybe we get a little bit more time, but even if not, we're going to have more life, maybe not more years, yeah? This is just another way of looking at it. I had this slide in the last talk, but this is what aging is today. You know, you're healthy for most of the time if you're lucky. You hit, you know, the 60s or so and things start happening. And you have this latter period of life where most people are grappling with more than one disease entity, whether it's hypertension, cardiovascular disease, you know, those sorts of things, cancers. And a lot of people debate whether the increase in lifespan that we've attained has been really an increase in more years of morbidity. That, you know, over the past few decades, you know, there's been a progressive small increase in lifespan, actually decreased a little bit, and that was a combination of COVID and other variables, but generally it's been inching up. But the thing is, we're keeping people alive who aren't well. And the goal is to do this, it's called compression of morbidity, so that you can, you know, have that last period where there is, you know, disease and disability be shortened. And one of the interesting things about centenarians is they have a very short period of decreased health at the end of their life. It's not that they live to be 105, but they've been really struggling for the last 30 years at all. It's different. And we'll talk about why and how we can use that as a model. A lot of people, when you get into these conversations, say, oh, that's a terrible idea. You know, I mean, studying aging and having interventions where you're just going to have more old people around and they're going to be sick and they're going to be a drain on the society and it's going to cost a lot. It's actually not true. If you contract that period of morbidity, you create a positive in terms of dollars even. If you target the biology of aging, we can delay cancer, you know, these things, cancer, cardiovascular disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all of these things. The economic value of delaying that is estimated to be, and they looked at delaying it by 1 year, $7.1 trillion over 50 years. It's not an insignificant amount of money. So again, the goal is not life extension, it's health extension. And the problem with the way we're approaching it now is that you take any one of these diseases, you know, cardiovascular disease, it gets funded. Dollars that go to cardiovascular disease don't go to cancer. Cancer dollars, you know, help cancer. It's sort of a whack-a-mole. If you knock out cancer, well, you're going to die of cardiovascular disease. You know, these are all things that are caused by aging, right? If you can't call aging a disease or a treatable condition, then you can't get funding for it. And you can't have FDA approval for any kind of medication. So you can have nutraceuticals, and that's what's happening now, but that's an unregulated industry. And that's not the way we want to go, right? So let's start with the question, why do we age? And there are lots of theories, and some of them have been proven wrong. Some of them just talk about different stages of aging. But one of the classic ones was disposable soma theory, soma meaning body. So it talks about how, you know, there's just so much energy, and you can either prioritize growth and reproduction, or you can prioritize longevity, which is really repair, regeneration, right? And the idea is in nature, usually you breed fast and die young, but there are some animals that breed more slowly, have smaller litters or whatever, you know, offspring, and they live longer, yeah? So it's always worth looking at anything that's related to health or biology from an evolutionary standpoint, right? And I can't remember who said, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, but it's absolutely true. So there's another theory called antagonistic pleiotropy. So pleiotropy is just when you have something that has multiple effects, right? And if you have antagonistic pleiotropy, some of those effects are positive and some of them are negative. So that would be antagonistic. And examples of that would be, if you had a mutation that fostered dementia or osteoporosis or cataracts before breeding, it would be weeded out, or that species would disappear, right? Because natural selection would be at play. If you had a mutation that even weakly increased strength or speed in the young, the reproducible age, it would be favored, even if it caused serious illness down the road. And that's sort of the antagonistic pleiotropy theory, that there are things that are very good for us when we're young and growing and reproducing, that down the road are actually negative. But the thing to remember here really is, once you're 50, nature's done with us in terms of natural selection. There's no program for us because there's no adaptation going on, right? But that doesn't mean it has to stay the same. Another popular theory of aging is related to inflammation. And there's even a term, inflammaging, that is being used in the field a lot now. And as you can see, it's related to all of these diseases, which are all the age-related chronic conditions. And so inflammation is one of the early pathways that is leading to all of these things, which is just another example of how it would make so much sense to be addressing the most proximate to the process rather than down the road. I mean, the idea that you should be taking different diseases separately, it's sort of like if you have say air pollution, and you call it one thing in New York and another thing in Florida, and everybody in each state is designing their own program and studying it, and it would make no sense, right? So the last theory that I'm going to share with you is called the loss of information theory. And it's interesting because it works with a group of variables that are very important now in the way we're studying things that have an effect on aging, either speeding it up or slowing it down. And David Sinclair is the father of that theory. And he did the research with resveratrol with Leonard Guarante at MIT originally, and then broke off, and he's become sort of a guru in the anti-aging field. And it's based on the idea that there are two types of information in biology, two types of information storage. One is the genome, right, which is your DNA. And you can think of that as sort of like the computer. And then there's the epigenome, which is the software. And they're equally important. And the epigenome and our appreciation of it is a relatively recent, finding. So the genome is digital, right? It's not zeros and ones. There are 4 base nucleotides, as you, I'm sure, remember from your high school biology. And it can be copied with great accuracy. It's incredibly stable. We've been able to look at Neanderthal DNA, and it's viable, which is amazing. So it's been nature's information storage for billions of years. And I'm talking about plants, fungus, every life form. The epigenome is analog. So if you think about the genome as a piano, and each gene is a key, and each key produces a note, the epigenome would be the pianist. The epigenome determines which genes are going to be turned on and which genes are going to be turned off. So if you have a mistake, it's not that the piano's the problem. The DNA is not the problem most of the time. It's changes that occur in the epigenome because it's not digital. It's not so durable. It's vulnerable to change from the environment. So the epigenome directs the assembly and maintenance of a human. And if you think about it, it's extraordinary. You start with a fertilized egg that turns into about 26 billion cells in an infant, in a newborn. Each one of those cells has all the genetic information to be any kind of cell, right? So it's the epigenome that tells each of those cells, you're going to be a skin cell, you're going to be a lens cell, you're going to be a hair cell, you're going to be a neural cell, you know. So that is the epigenome's job. And it can be changed easily. It's intent, nature did it intentionally. I mean, it was, you know, a natural selection because it allowed adaptation to environmental changes. All right, here's a visual on that. So what it does is it spools the DNA, the epigenome, it's wrapped around, and it opens areas that will be expressed, turned on, and it spools up and shuts off genes that won't be expressed. And Sinclair's theory is that aging is epigenetic noise that is caused by damage to the cell. And one of the things you can see, for instance, is like a cancer. The control of growth and the integrity of the form of the cells is compromised because the epigenome is falling apart, and it's like the piano player making mistakes. The tune that's coming out is not the melody that's supposed to be played. Another, you know, question that has made people think about why you might be able to manipulate aging is because of different animals having radically different lifespans, right? These are all rodents. Why does a mouse live 2 years, a porcupine 18, bat 30, naked mole? Does anybody have an idea about that? Well, in this instance, it was safety. If you think about it, porcupine has quills, a bat can fly and get out, and a naked mole rat lives underground and basically has no natural predators. So this is a quote again. Nature invented the backbone once, the hand once, hair once, but figures out longevity again and again whenever a species stumbles into a safe niche that mitigates risk and offers a payoff for decelerating aging. So right, there always has to be natural selection at play. So what happens is when these animals find themselves in a safe environment, they're living longer, there's reason to take, you know, the animals that continue to be able to reproduce, for instance, and give them a survival advantage. But what this made people think is it's regulated. I mean, it's the same animal, right? That it evolves and becomes safe, and now it's living longer. You know, why is that? Another interesting phenomenon that I think is important to know about in this area is called negligible senescence. There are some animals that do not seem to age. If you look at their lifespan, they don't show any evidence of reductions in reproductive capacity, function, and there's no difference in their death rate at the end of their life versus during their life. It's kind of remarkable. The naked mole rat is the only mammal that's been identified that they believe has negligible senescence. But some other examples, you know, rockfish lives 200 years on average. Greenland shark, 500 years. So there's something going on that's a natural process, right, that allows these animals to somehow escape the phenomenon of aging. So if you look at the naked mole rat, take an old naked mole rat, a 25-year-old, its body composition, pretty much the same as a young one. It's still fertile. There's no change in its mortality rate. It doesn't get sick very often. They've never observed cancer in these animals. No change in its basal metabolic rate, its insulin sensitivity, its vascular and bone health, all markers of aging. And this is interesting because they said it's got high levels of oxidative stress, right? So that whole oxidation theory of aging is really out the window. And if you want to save some money, throw your antioxidant vitamins away because it's not doing any good. The thing about these animals is they have phenomenal repair and regenerative mechanisms going on. And that's what we're beginning to understand, and that's what's exciting in the field. So this is a picture of C. elegans. It's a worm. It's about the size of a comma. And this is the animal that was being studied that allowed for the real breakthrough in understanding aging. So this is very new stuff. I mean, until the 80s, it was basically sort of a wear and tear, stuff breaks down, stuff starts working less well. They didn't have any significant specific pathways identified. And then Cynthia Kenyon out at UCSF in '93 started studying C. elegans. And she started looking at longer lived mutants and kept breeding them, and isolated one gene, DAF2, that if it was in a mutant form, it doubled lifespan. And again, it not only doubled lifespan, but these worms were healthy until shortly before they died. It wasn't that they had a longer period of morbidity. That gene turns out to encode a hormone receptor for insulin and insulin-like growth factor, two hormones that we have and that we have receptors for. And these genes promote nutrient uptake and growth. And you can see the same mutation having the same effect in all of these animals. So in other words, evolution has conserved this pathway, right? So how's it work? I'm not going to get into details, but you might you've heard of FOXO, maybe not. I mean, people who read the literature, but what happens is DAF2 turns on FOXO, and FOXO regulates these genes. And that's what those negligible senescence animals had in spades, these antioxidants. And there's a difference between taking exogenous antioxidants and your body creating. And the difference mainly is that if the body doesn't have the stress that makes them create antioxidants, they don't work. And I think I've spoken about, I don't know if, people who take antioxidant vitamins before they exercise lose much of the therapeutic effect of the exercise, because changes that occur, positive changes as a result of exercise, are triggered by the stress, the oxidative stress of the exercise. You take that away and you've eliminated the therapeutic effect. So if you have these genes really turned on, you slow the rate of aging, you promote health span, and you see these animals have incredible resistance to diseases associated with aging. So again, we have to go back and say, why would evolution do this? What's the sense? And it seems as if under favorable conditions, growth, reproduction makes sense, right? But it would make no sense to be putting energy into growth and reproduction and taking care of offspring if the animals aren't going to make it. You're going into a famine. The last thing you want to do is increase energy demand, increase how much work you're going to have to do. So if an animal is in a famine situation, caloric restriction, right? If it's not getting how many calories it usually does, it switches into this other mode where you turn off or turn down that hormone system and you ignite that whole process that is for protection, regeneration, repair. Okay? So in a way, if you remember, we were talking about hormesis and how, there are stressors that have positive effect on our biology. And, whether it's cold exposure, hot exposure, caloric restriction, fasting, all those things. This is the biochemical explanation for it. And really, if there's anybody has an idea or a question or something, please bring it up, because it's a small enough group and it would be, just.
Well, you mentioned that you have cancer as you age, but you have a lot of young people that have cancer.
Well, comparatively, no.
Okay, percentage-wise.
I mean, there are childhood cancers, that's true, but they're rare by comparison. I mean, the chances of being, well, if you're a male, you're going to have a benign, your prostate, terrible to say. But there's no comparison to the incidence of cancers in people as they age. And it's interesting too, because you see some childhood cancers, but you see it dip if you had a magnified view of the cancer incidence around puberty and teenagehood, which makes sense, right? You're going to lose some, but when you are reproductive, you have every system maxed out to prevent any kind of damage to your genome, right?
So,
Yeah.
I saw that the title of the program on Hot Topics, Healthy Aging, and I thought it would be something positive about aging. I think we all are familiar, maybe not as medically, as you laid it out here, but we're all familiar that the end is coming, that we may get sick, and we may have this or that disease. But what are the benefits?
Well, that's a great question. That's what I'm trying to, maybe I just have too negative a demeanor. But I'm trying to talk about pushing all of these things that are associated with aging to our last days, so that you're going to have an old age that is, for the most part, healthy, functional. You'll be contributing. You'll be doing what you want to do. You'll be intact. You'll be physically able. You'll be cognitively, functioning. I see that as a positive.
This is leading to that.
Yeah, this is. Well, I have to, get you guys hungry for it. So this is good. It's working.
You have to go down before you go up.
Yeah, but I mean, back here, I was talking about. It was from the very beginning. This is good news. This is a good news slide. This is a smiley, right? No?
Maybe you can explain it to me again, I'm sorry.
This is our situation today, and I'm saying this is what we can do. So today, let's say this is 60, you start getting everything you know about. And we've increased the length of time you spend in that state. That's what medicine has offered over the past few decades. We can do this. We can give you more years of healthy life. And I'm going to get to how we came to be able to do that. You want the abstract, you want the synopsis. This is just an interesting thing to my mind. I love dogs. Here you have a Great Dane and a Chihuahua. Same species. Pretty amazing. One of the things that people have noticed is that there's different lifespans with different species, and that size is usually a determinant. So that if you look at small animals, they usually don't live as long as bigger animals, right? If you look at a mouse compared to a cat, compared to an elephant, compared to a whale, lifespan's going up each time you increase size, right? With dogs, it's exactly the opposite. And there's more diversity in size of dogs than any other vertebrate. on the planet. So Great Dane lives about 5-7 years, Chihuahua 20. That's quite a big difference, right? But it's that same thing. It's the insulin-like growth factor, right? I mean, it can be separated, but in dogs, for whatever reason, it wasn't. So if you shut down the growth part of the gene combo, you're going to live longer, right? Because the animal's not putting all this energy into growth. Yeah. So what we're saying is that stressors trigger this survival circuit that takes the animal from a growth, energy storage, reproduction mode into a repair regeneration mode. And that switch slows aging, it prevents age-related diseases, it confers a survival advantage, as we said, and every living thing has this circuit. And so now the focus in research is, how do we tap that circuit? Until recently, first of all, with humans, we're too long-lived to do studies in seeing how, you can change longevity, right? You could never fund the study. It would be too many years, right? And that's why C. elegans was so great, because it has a 30-day, lifespan, or fruit flies, or things like that. But the other thing that you need to be able to do is measure what an intervention does. In other words, you give an intervention, has aging accelerated or decelerated? Because we know we can do that now, right? So you have these two concepts. You have chronological age, which is what we always used, and it's just years alive. And then we have biological age. And this uses biomarkers that reflect functional capacity, health, mortality risk, and it explains different trajectories of aging, why some people age faster or slower than others. And if you don't have a way of measuring biological age, you can't assess any of these interventions. It's a artificial intelligence, it's unbelievably complicated, but it seems to be pretty good. And the way that they do it is they look at the epigenome. It's called a biological clock or an epigenetic clock. When you see somebody who has, let's say, one of the diseases associated with aging, and you do their biological age, and you compare it to a control that is matched in everything except for that disease, you see a different biological age. And the person who has that age-related disease has accelerated aging. And so they are older than their chronological age, biologically. So these are the areas that are spoken about in terms of hallmarks of aging. And each one of those is a field unto itself. But there does seem to be a common pathway. So this is the part that you want. How do we turn back the clock? How do we slow aging down or reverse it even? Caloric restriction. This is the most reproducible way of prolonging health span as well as lifespan. You cut the intake of calories by as much as 25%, short of malnutrition, and it triggers that pathway, that survival circuit, right? It's not tenable. It's there's some people who do it, but they're kooks. I mean, it's very hard, to eat that little, and it's not very pleasant. Who wants to be alive if you can't have a good meal? So, but they've shown this in animals from yeast to primates. So it's evolutionary conserved, it's there. Their insulin sensitivity goes way up, their blood pressure comes down, inflammation goes down. There was a 2-year study that demonstrated reduction in biological age with caloric restriction that was really well reviewed. Yeah.
So what numbers would you put with that? How many calories a day?
I don't even know. I don't think anyone in this room could do it. You'd be miserable. But,
Because 25% reduction for someone who has 3,000 calories a day is different than
well, that's
someone
true. That's
who
true.
has 1,200 calories a
Right.
day. So
And if you start out and you're obese, you're going to weather that storm a lot more comfortably, you know, not psychologically maybe, but in terms of having energy stores with fat for a long time.
So what
But-
you're saying is any 25%, no matter where you start,
Yeah.
will help you.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, wherever you start from. So if you're starting from a reasonable diet, you're going to be suffering. Yeah,
I read once, so that if you want to weigh 120 pounds, this is for a woman, I don't know about men, or for men, you should eat 1,200 calories. That's what they said. And so I thought, how easy is that? I want to weigh 120 pounds. I just
Yeah,
have to
if
count
that works.
1,200 calories. But so the 25% off, I will just take 25% off my 1,200 calorie intake daily. Is that correct?
theoretically.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you know,
That's
the
wonderful.
calories in, calories out model is dead. I mean, obviously, there is a relationship between calories in and weight.
Well, I'm talking about also exercise along with.
Yeah, but you know, metabolic rate is different, absorption is different. There's a million variables that, you know, you can have two people who, you can, you know, they've done these experiments, and I was about to talk about, you know, there's something called caloric restriction mimetics. It's, you know, it's like caloric restriction, but it's like caloric restriction light, you know. And what you do is you increase the period of time that you don't eat. Intermittent fasting is a form of caloric restriction mimetic, right? And what they see is that you get many of the benefits of caloric restriction, not as intensely, but you do get many of the benefits by doing it that way. So, you know, a lot of people say don't eat breakfast. You go from dinner to lunch and you have an extended period of, you know, not eating, and that's helpful. And I think that's true. The tricky part is I think it changes, and there's really recent data that suggests that, you know, depending upon what stage of life you're in, you may or may not want to do that. But I'll talk about that on the weight management talk. So metformin is a medication. I don't know, is anyone on metformin here? Yeah. It's been around since the 60s. It's incredibly safe. It's prescribed for type 2 diabetics. And it's interesting because diabetes is a model of accelerated aging. If you look at diabetics, they have impaired wound healing, they get cataracts, they have cardiovascular disease, they have a disproportionate number of cancers. And they were doing this big study looking at diabetics and on metformin, and they had up to 40% less cancer than diabetics who were treated with insulin. So it sure looked like it was the metformin that was doing that. And metformin has probably prevented more cases of cancer than any other medication that we've ever used. The real study that blew everybody's mind was in 2014. They found that diabetics on metformin lived longer than the non-diabetic controls. And so it became something that they were really studying for preventing age-related diseases. And what's interesting is it hits, so there's nutrient sensing pathways that get stimulated when you fast or you're doing caloric restriction that switch that survival circuit on, right? And that's the AMPK, but what they also found was that metformin releases a lot of these, it causes reactive oxygen species. In other words, it creates an oxidative insult, and the body responds to it in a way that makes the body more resilient. And I think metformin is a fantastic idea for anyone who can tolerate it. Some people get some indigestion from it. It doesn't bottom out your sugar. It has really no side effects outside of some GI distress for some people. And I don't know what the numbers are. but there's millions and millions of diabetics taking this all over the world. So we have data. We know if there was something that was going to happen as a result of taking metformin, we would know it. And it is the only medication. It's not approved for treating aging because you can't get approval of anything for aging. But you can get your doctor to prescribe it if he's forward thinking. And I do that with my clients all the time.
Without having diabetes, you can take metformin.
Yeah, I do.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, how about supplements? You know, this isn't exhaustive, and I selected the ones that I think have the best data and that are proven safe. And I tried where we know to give you sort of an idea of how they seem to work. But alpha ketoglutarate has good data. And see, the thing is now, yeah.
I just took a quick look at metformin side effects
Oh, well,
for women.
yeah.
And it includes diarrhea, stomachache, loss of appetite, being sick, vomiting, feeling sick, and a metallic taste in the mouth.
But outside of that, I said GI side effects.
Right. Yes. Is that sufficient?
Well, yeah, I do. If you look at, you know, where did you find that? What's your source?
It said National Health.
Yeah, you know where they get that? The PDR. You know what the PDR is? It's the physician's desk reference. And it lists every reported side effect of every medication. And it's used as a legal document so that when people want to litigate, whether it's 1 in a million, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10, but if you look at the reviews, I mean, this is part of the problem, you know, and I'm really glad I don't do direct care anymore, because toward the end, people always come in, and I'm all for informed patients, and I think the most important member of the team is the patient, and they should be looking at things and researching things. But it's hard to assess the quality of the information that you're getting. Are you taking any medications? No.
But would you say that all medications might have this long list of side effects?
Absolutely. Look up any medication. Yeah. That's not even a long list.
No.
I mean, have you listened to any of the ads on television? Blindness, you know, constipation, diarrhea, premature death.
Hair loss.
Hair. Yeah, I'm not minimizing, you know, side effect profiles of medications. It just so happens that metformin happens to be one of the cleanest medications we have out there.
Like, who says that?
Do you know the names?
Well, you'd have to look at literature.
Well, which literature said that? Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak to you afterward.
Okay, you just said before that we should ask questions.
Yeah, I just think I don't want to derail the entire lecture to talk to you about side effects. Is that all right?
Thank you.
Okay. So, you know, these are, you know, supplements that have been shown to, with the epigenetic clocks, to slow down or reverse aging. And they also seem very safe. Some of them are from plant compounds like quercetin, phycin, curcumin. Some of them are natural, like alpha ketoglutarate is something that we produce in our energy cycles. Spermidine also. Glucosamine, interestingly, is, you know, a lot of people take glucosamine for arthritis and bad knees and things, you know, combined with chondroitin sulfate. Glucosamine has been shown to induce autophagy, which is, you know, when the cell starts not being so good at making the proteins. Autophagy identifies the misshaped, you know, proteins and breaks them down and uses whatever components that can be saved and gets rid of the rest. Senolytics is a whole nother, you know, branch of this kind of intervention. And what they do is they get rid of old cells. One of the things that can happen to senescent cells is that they can be toxic and they're really inflammatory. And so if you can clear those cells, you can make a big difference in the aging process. And then these are sort of the most recent, and Sinclair and his group and Guarante have done a lot of the pioneering research on them. And it seems as if these agents really connect with the sirtuins, which are involved with resveratrol and the survival circuit and turning that on. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the things that are really easily accessible to us that have profound effects. And it's the same old list that you see. And the thing is, now that we have these epigenetic clocks, we can show, even over a period of a year or months, that there's change in the methylation of the epigenome, which is the way that the clocks are measured. The thing that I think is helpful in terms of bringing a lot of this stuff together is that concept of hormesis that we've spoken about, where you're basically creating a stressor, right? The survival circuit, is understood as something that the animal has turned on when it is in a stressful environment. And so one of the biggest things that we're trying to figure out is how to titrate the stress so that you can have exposure without damage, right? Because the whole curve of the hormesis response is, you can have a little bit, you have a therapeutic effect, you get more exposure, and you go into a negative effect. So that's what is being worked out. But it's interesting because, genetics isn't destiny. It seems that, aging is 70 to 80% environmental, lifestyle, nurture, and 20 to 30% nature.
Question.
Yeah.
Light alcohol consumption. Is that saying there is some benefit to light alcohol consumption, or
Not heavy alcohol.
yeah, or don't do the heavy because that's
Yeah. Well, that's a burning topic these
Yeah.
days, it seems. And, if you look at some of the studies with cancer, for instance, you can see an increase in the incidence of cancer with just one drink a day in some people, But the thing is, there's a guy in Australia who's at Einstein, who's doing one of the biggest studies on centenarians. And he was the big guy with the metformin also. And he said that of his centenarians, something like 2% were vegetarian, less than half of them have exercised in their life, 75% of them smoke. Those aren't the things that are keeping them alive, right? People love to say, oh yeah, that's what's keeping them alive now. But these are people who have a different genetic disposition to responding to, and so it's like the naked mole rat, lots of oxidative insult, just fine, because its repair, regeneration mechanisms are so robust. Yeah.
So similar question about coffee on that list. Is that a statement?
Coffee, it's funny. I think there's a natural tendency to believe that if something is pleasurable, it's probably not good for you. I don't know if that's just the Anglo-Saxon, but yeah, coffee. If coffee hadn't been discovered and used, it would be a drug. It's really beneficial, and if you think about it, I mean, there's no reason a plant is necessarily good for you, but it has all sorts of compounds that are really good for your health. And they say, it's not even 1 cup a day. I think it's 3 to 5 cups a day seems to be, in the studies that have been done.
So it's the coffee, not the caffeine in the coffee. What about tea? It's not, in other words, it's not caffeine, it's the coffee and stuff that's beneficial.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be the caffeine.
Okay.
No. And tea is, there's these compounds that have been identified in coffee, green tea especially, white tea. But yeah, teas have a lot of good things in them as well. Yeah.
I believe, if I may interject for a second, that I just heard about coffee being possibly keeping one alert and possibly just maybe an anti-Alzheimer's little bit. Type of,
Yeah.
situation. They've done some study with coffee.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in it and a lot of research going on right now. But people who say coffee's bad for you, or very proudly say I've quit coffee, that's great, but I don't think it's necessarily going to improve your health. But unless if you have a arrhythmia, for instance, coffee may not be a good thing for you because it does make the electrical system of the heart a little more excited. But for everyone else, it doesn't.
Is it the caffeine in the coffee?
That would be the caffeine. So if you're interested, this is a citation. This was a study where they looked at, and they only did it for 8 weeks, and it's been reproduced. And they had a washout for whatever the people were doing before the study. They had great reporting, and they gave them specific diet, sleep practice, exercise, stress management, and probiotics and phytonutrients. And they saw a decrease in the biological clock in an 8-week treatment. So the power of addressing those things is enormous. Nobody is making, well, people are making money off the last two and the first one, I suppose, but it's not about medicated sleep or, a fancy gym membership. It's about moving, eating less, not eating processed foods, not eating trans fat. It's all the things that, we hear about all the time, but I think we underestimate, because it's not very sophisticated, the impact that it can have. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about briefly is sort of a fountain of youth thing. There's something called parabiosis, and in 1950s, for the first time, they hooked up the circulation of a young animal and an old animal. And in the 50s, they didn't do a whole big analysis, but one of the things they noticed was osteoporotic bone became dense, nice, young-looking bone. It was a tricky thing to do in the lab, and so it kind of fell out of favor. And then in the 70s, they started looking again, and they were able to get over some of the hurdles just in terms of the technique. And they showed that older animals, and this is rats, lived 4 to 5 months longer than the controls. And if a rat's average lifespan is 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5 months is a lot of time, right? And they thought it must be something in the young blood, right? And so there was this incredible, search for what is the factor in young blood, and they found a couple of things that seemed to be helpful, but it wasn't working out so well. And they were trying to theorize why is this working in these cases, and they thought maybe the regenerative capacity declines with age because your stem cells get old and they can't function as well, right? But then someone took old muscle and put it into a young host, and it reproduced it did beautifully, right? So old stem cells were fine. So that was out the window. And when they did the opposite, regeneration was impaired when they put young muscle into the old host. So clearly it wasn't a problem with the stem cells, right? But they started thinking maybe it's the environment. So by environment, I mean systemic factors that would, affect how these things were able to function. So do systemic factors promote successful regeneration in young animals and inhibit them in old animals? And if that's true, old tissue might regain youthful regenerative function through changing the environment, right? And so in 2005, they put, young blood, without connecting the circuit, just a transfusion of young blood, seemed to reverse aging. And they were, okay, we've got it now and everything, but they were wrong. And what they found was the inhibitory effects, the negative effects of the old blood was more powerful than the benefits of the young blood. So this is the idea that, you have senescent cells, old cells that become toxic. And if you can get rid of them, you can turn the clock back. And it's sort of amazing. So in 2020, they did this single treatment. They took half the plasma of old animal, replaced it with just salt water and albumin, a protein at normal levels. And it equaled or exceeded rejuvenating effects of hooking the circulation of the young and old animal up, right? And it was the toxic molecules being removed. The really amazing thing to me is that there was on a molecular level, there was a reversion to young signaling so that, the tissue maintenance, repair, and immune competence of old tissue was restored when you got rid of these old toxic senescent cells. So again, what we're saying is, the genome is there, it's ready. And if you can remove the stuff that's damaging the epigenome, you're going to be able to access viable DNA, viable information to do what it's supposed to do. And that's a very exciting finding. And in 2022, they showed this in humans. And there's now a procedure called therapeutic plasma exchange that I think every, out in Silicon Valley, probably every, billionaire is getting. But it's FDA approved actually for certain neurological disorders and autoimmune conditions, where if you can think of it, you're getting rid of these certain cells that are causing damage. But it has an incredible rejuvenating effect. And it's quite well tolerated. There's a lab that's doing a lot of experiments with this, and they are opening their study. I almost signed up for it, I think, but I didn't in the end. But and this is obviously kind of primitive. It's like dialysis or something. I mean, eventually we're going to have a much more sophisticated way of getting rid of the senescent cells. Yeah.
If you regenerate the cells in the body, you're including the brain, aren't you?
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Which is your major organ.
Absolutely. And it's one of the ones that gets damaged most rapidly because it's such a high metabolic rate. For its size, it's much more metabolically active than and that's why sleep is so important, actually.
Yeah, so your
right?
cognition will improve.
Yeah.
It seems like we hear of more people living to be in their hundreds than we used to. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, I think right now it's that we're keeping people alive more than we're keeping them healthy.
Okay.
And that's why research that's aimed at the biology of aging is so important, and that we really need to approach the situation directly that way, because the bang for the buck is going to be incomparable to each disease that we do.
That's why we hear more and more about CPAPs and BiPAPs.
This is exactly why, right? We need to understand aging, because it's not to live much longer, but it's to be functional much longer. And these findings, suggest that we're around the corner from that.
Okay.
I think another reason people are living longer is that they're not smoking as much. I think that there's a greater awareness of physical activity and the importance of that. I think diets might be a bit better. Yeah.
Can you explain again about oxidation and antioxidants, and is that a way of getting rid of the cells that are not good, or just
Yeah.
explain what you were saying about that again?
Yeah. So if you looked at what turns on the survival circuit,
Right.
it's a variety of stressors, right? In the same way that you get your hormesis response by creating, there are a number of stressors. It can be fasting, it can be hot, it can be cold, right? But what happens, for instance, when you exercise, is you create an oxidative insult,
Which means you're.
which means you create reactive oxygen species, all the things that you're supposed to combat with antioxidants. And that's why we thought antioxidant vitamins are going to be the answer. Antioxidant vitamins have been tried for an intervention with aging and looking at the biological clock and everything, and it's failed.
Right.
What we've learned, in the big picture is basically, we used to think health is living within certain parameters, right? Whether you're talking about pH, blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, everything, right? It turns out that's not true at all. What makes someone healthy is pushing the animal outside of those bounds, not too far outside them, but pushing it outside of that so that the body has to trigger these pathways that not only bring it back, but also fire up the survival circuit, which is regeneration, repair, taking care of the epigenome so that you can function better. Yeah.
So creating the oxygen in your body is a good thing with the exercise.
Yeah.
Is that-
The oxidative insult. Yeah.
Explain what oxidative insult means.
So, oxygen is actually quite toxic.
It's quite toxic.
Toxic. Yeah. So if you look at, they used to put, well, I don't remember the condition, but they put infants in these oxygen tanks, newborns, and they had all sorts of problems, retinal problems. And the thing is, oxygen can drop an electron and be unpaired. And so it becomes incredibly reactive. And it interacts with proteins in the body in a negative way. That's it's physics and chemistry, but
That's so counterintuitive to what we've been told.
right? Well,
Right.
yeah, no, we think oxygen is the key to the
Yes.
best thing for life, but nobody gives pure oxygen anymore. Yeah,
Doesn't it affect the pH, the acidity in the body?
sure. Because
More oxygen, more acidic. Or is it the other way
well,
around?
no, but yeah. It's really complicated, but I mean, you give somebody oxygen and if you change their carbon dioxide levels, their
Yeah.
stimulus to breathe goes down and they start getting more acidic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do the CPAPs and the BiPAPs do?
they're pushing air.
Just pushing air.
Yeah, that's a pressure problem. There's a compromised airway with apnea, sleep apnea. And so what that does is it provides enough pressure to get through. It's not changing the oxygen content at all. Yeah,
That's scaring me.
That list of supplements you had before,
yeah.
are those ones that you would recommend?
I don't know legally what I'm able to say.
Right. Well, put it
I
like this,
take many
generally
of them.
is the research positive about
Yeah,
this?
yeah, no, I could have filled 10 slides with things that people are promoting as, anti-aging compounds. Those are the ones that I think are safe, that have been studied and proven to, affect people or animals on the biological clock, right? And we have some sense of how they're doing it.
Vitamin D is.
Vitamin D is key. In part, this goes back to another thing, but we have recommended daily allotments, with these vitamins and minerals and things. And those are set really into, like if you look at vitamin C, it's like the amount you need to have not to get scurvy.
Mhm.
That doesn't tell you anything about what would help you have optimal function, right? And a lot of this stuff, is best consumed in foods because that packaging is what we've been made to, use
And some,
since the beginning.
they say,
But that's the thing. So you look at vitamin D. We spend something like 98% or 97% of our time, the average American, inside. We evolved spending all of our time outside, right? And vitamin D is provided through, some exposure, right? Right, skin. So, vitamin D and bone, that's the way Western medicine looks at things. It's like, if you have a pathology, I can help you. Are your vitamin D levels low? If you're fine, I'm not going to even look at your vitamin D level. Wrong. That's wrong. And I think we're going to be readjusting what is an advisable vitamin D level because I think it's low. It's really low. And a year doesn't go by that we don't find something that is made worse by low vitamin D levels. And the thing is, so we don't go outside very much. And even if you're taking vitamin D or eating the right foods, our absorption decreases as we age. So there's a reason to supplement some stuff. Yeah.
Paul, I just had a physical and my doctor called me up and we did blood work and she said, I want you to increase your vitamin D. She said it's lower than we want it. And I take 1,000 a day.
Okay.
She wants me to take 1,400 a day.
Okay.
And I really don't understand. I didn't understand it all until now you're explaining it a little bit better. I mean, I'm always outside. I'm in the garden. I get the sun. I couldn't, but you're saying as you get older,
Yeah.
you don't.
same with vitamin D.
Make it as easily and you don't absorb it as easily. Yeah.
And excuse me, just a second.
Yeah.
Am I to understand correctly that vitamin D is necessary for us to keep getting our bones to grow as we age?
There is a debate going on about whether vitamin D, there's no question that it's involved in bone turnover, something you want to be happening all the time, remodeling, right? But I guess more exactly, the vitamin D calcium combination is looking like it doesn't really work so well. That the calcium doesn't seem to be adding necessarily much to the fortification of the skeleton.
The chondroitin, glucosamine chondroitin, in the pills that you take, I assume that one does that because there's not enough intake in regular food. What food would
Yeah,
that?
that's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if there's a natural
What
source.
do you suggest taking?
Glucosamine, yeah. The studies in terms of arthritis and joint pain that are sort of all over the map. But the studies with just glucosamine and aging pathways is pretty impressive.
Not the chondroitin.
No, just
I
glucosamine.
used to take it years ago and then I stopped for whatever reason. So
Yeah, you can take just glucosamine. Yeah.
It's not bad.
I'm very apprehensive about glucosamine where it's made. And then, there was this craze about the fish oil. And I looked at all about the fish oil, so forget it. I don't need, how much krill does it take to make it, whatever, but I didn't need that.
Yeah.
I got kind of apprehensive about the fish oil. I just eat regular, fish oil. What do you know about glucosamine? Do you have any advice? Not advice.
Yeah, I could,
background
there's
you'd like to share?
there's an organization called Consumer Labs. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, Consumer Labs. And they do pretty good reviews of, summarizing all the data and then coming out with, recommendations. And they also, and because there's no government agency doing this, go through the, biggest brands making a given compound and how much of the supposed active ingredient is in it, if any, and what other things are in it. So they do a really nice breakdown that I think is a good guide. Consumer Labs.
That's good.
Is
Yeah.
that in
It's on the online.
online?
Right. So I'm to understand supplements are not FDA approved. They don't have to be.
Nope.
So like,
God bless America.
when you see on television, if I may just one quickly go. I see all the jellyfish or Prevagen. How much jellyfish are they using to sell Prevagen? I mean.
Ask Dr. Ross.
Yeah.
Am I to really believe something? I can't believe that to
Well,
myself.
it's smart to be skeptical.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just wanted to just double check.
Yeah.
Consumer like.
Maybe we should stop. Yeah,
Sure.
thank you.
Oh, good.
Thank you.